Thank you very much, Dana, for a generous and moving introduction. I appreciate that very much. And I'm thrilled to be here with you. I love the opportunity to speak with groups of international educators. We have this frequently at Harvard, and even now from time to time I get back over there to speak with groups like this. I always approach it with a sense of humility because it seems to me every time I have a conversation with folks like yourselves coming from around the world that we're all working in the same direction. We come from different backgrounds, we come from different cultures, different societies that are organized in different ways, but we're trying to help our children, our students, maximize the opportunities they have in life. We're trying to build a better society as a whole. We're up against common struggles of how do we find the right political equations and financial equations to make possible the work that we want to do on behalf of children. But the labor we're doing is a labor of love, and it crosses cultural and international boundaries. We're here, and I'm really only qualified to talk about the kinds of struggles we're engaged in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the kind of progress in the United States that we're making and the kinds of challenges we're up against. So I hope that what I can do in my comments this evening is to frame a little bit of our work here in the state of Massachusetts for you, so that in this environment where you'll be for the next little while in your conference, and I commend you for the work that you have ahead of you, you'll understand a little bit of the educational environment here, and then I hope we'll have an opportunity for some dialogue. And I appreciate the invitation to do this. I appreciate particularly President Molafari's leadership on education generally. He's one of the governor's confidants on matters of education, was the governor's education advisor when this governor came to office, is one of the most renowned, respected higher education leaders in not only in the Commonwealth but in the country, and we're very proud to have someone like him leading a flagship campus like Bridgewater, and also in this kind of pioneering work, taking one of our state colleges into the forefront of connecting with colleagues internationally, because this is so critically important in terms of where this nation is headed and where our students need to be headed in order to be well prepared. So let me give you just a little bit of a snapshot of of where we are in Massachusetts and how we're thinking about some of these kinds of issues. And then I hope if we have time we can open it up a little bit and give people a chance to talk. Of course, education is organized in different ways in different places. One of the things that strikes me most when I visit a lot of countries, and I have had the good fortune of being able to visit education systems all around the world. I recently got back from a trip with a group of teachers, actually, most of whom from various cities in Massachusetts, and we went to Cambodia and Vietnam, and we had a chance to visit with the ministries of education in those countries and to see some schools in operation and to talk to teachers and students and administrators there. One of the things you can't help but notice in most places is that education, for the most part, in other countries is organized centrally by a national government, and policy proceeds from the national government down to the field. The tradition in this country, particularly in our K-12, our elementary and secondary system, is of a highly decentralized system. A country that was once a colony of another country, a people that was highly distrustful of centralized authority at a great distance from where they were. Even when we became our own republic, our own country on our own, people in our individual states did not want to cede power to authorities in the national government. So we have a system of education that grows out of our 50 states from the ground up. And Massachusetts was really the birthplace of public education, first public school being in Boston about 400 years ago. And that decentralized tradition has continued up until the recent past, and in the past couple of decades, again, especially in the elementary and secondary education sector, there has been a movement toward greater centralized power and authority within education, the setting of standards at a state level, and we now have conversations going about national standards, the development of assessment instruments and accountability systems, where the state has stepped forward and said, well, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, indeed the United States of America, has an interest in each and every one of our children being well educated. And that supersedes the interest of local communities in controlling the process of education. So we are moving from a decentralized system to a more centralized system of education. At the very same time, when we talk with colleagues from around the world and find that many of them are moving away from more centralized systems to more decentralized systems that allow more local authority and responsiveness. They're correcting in some senses for overinvesting in central authority. We're correcting for overinvesting in decentralized and some of the incoherency that comes from a system that is too, in which authority is too widely diffused. And somewhere near the middle, we meet for a discourse on what works for children and what works for our respective societies. And so I just submit that as a framework for some of what I'm about to say. Here in Massachusetts, we start from a position of strength. We're widely recognized for our work among the 50 states in the Union. We have been widely recognized as having some of the highest standards of any of the most rigorous systems of assessment and accountability, for really being one of the leaders in terms of education reform in the United States. Our students lead the nation on a variety of tests that are taken. Even in some instances, we lead the world. But we still have, at the same time, major, persistent, and troubling achievement gaps, not only between various subgroups of our population, our students with special needs, for example, our students who are English language learners, our students who are African American students or Latino students, our students who are low income. If you just take that group as a whole, we've done very well in Massachusetts in educating our students on average to a higher level than in any other state in the country, but we have very large achievement gaps between our top performing students and our lowest performing students. And we recognize that in this era where we currently find ourselves, it's in our collective interest as a society to educate all our students to a high level, because we live in the kind of economy where we can't maintain the standard of living that we've become accustomed to in this country if we persist in educating only a few people to a high standard, lots of people to a middling to mediocre standard, and some people not educated well at all. There's no place to go in our society for these individuals who aren't highly educated any longer. You can't make a living to support a middle-class standard of life. You become, in some senses, if you're poorly educated, a burden upon society as well as a burden upon yourself. So part of what we're striving to do in Massachusetts is to make good on our education goal, which is to educate all students to a high level. And we see that not only as morally and ethically an imperative, but we see it as in our self-interest economically. So we have a convergence of interest between what we ought to do for children in any event and what we need to do in order to assure prosperity for our state in the future. So the question arises, what do we need to do in order to accomplish that? How do we need to close the achievement gaps? What kinds of skills and knowledge are essential for the future? We've made a big commitment in this state to prioritizing core subjects: English, math, science, social sciences. Those are very important topics. We measure performance in those subjects. We reward or sometimes sanction school districts and schools on the basis of their performance there. At the same time, we don't believe that that's all that one needs in order to be a highly educated citizen in the future. Our goal, broadly speaking, is to educate all of our students for success. By success, we mean the capacity to attain and to hold and prosper in a 21st century job in a prospering economy. We mean the capacity to be an active citizen and leader in a 21st century democracy. We mean the skills necessary to lead a family in our society. And finally, the skills and knowledge necessary to be a lifelong learner. So those are the kinds of things that we want to prepare people for, and the core subjects by themselves are not going to be enough to get us there. We need every child to have a well-rounded education. We've also been talking a lot in recent months about something we call 21st century skills. And what we mean by 21st century skills when we talk about that in the context of American public education is the capacity of young people to do things that are not so easily measured by standardized testing, but very important in terms of their capacity to be successful in the world of work. Skills like the capacity to articulate an oral argument and to be persuasive in talking to groups of people. Skills like the capacity to work in groups. Virtually all of our employers tell us we look at and evaluate our employees in large part on their capacity to be part of a team whose job it is to solve problems. And when we look at our education system and the way the system's organized, it tends to be organized on the basis of individual performance in isolation from other individuals. So we need to think about how we do that. Creativity, thinking outside the box, is kind of a cliche in American lingo, but what it really means is challenging people to think creatively and to solve problems in ways and means that aren't traditional. Because we think that's part of what the niche is for our economy in the future, which is we have problem solvers, people who are more thoughtful, more creative, more inventive in solving problems than people elsewhere. Because this is what we have to sell as a society. We don't have natural resources and we don't have a low cost of living. We don't even have a particularly hospitable climate, notwithstanding the nice day we have today. But what we do have to sell for the future, as is the case, I suspect, with many of you, is brain power. That's what's going to bring people to our state. That's what's going to cause companies to locate here if our labor force is more thoughtful, better educated, more able to solve problems than the labor force elsewhere. So we need to do whatever it takes to invest in that. And that's what brings me to the subject of global education, because one of the capacities we want our students to have in the future is the capacity to interact effectively with the rest of the world. And we have a tendency in this vast nation, which is in itself an island, to be somewhat isolated and parochial in our view and interactions with the rest of the world. So we've got to make a more conscious, deliberate effort as part of our educational system to inculcate some of the qualities that are important to young people who will enter a world that is much more internationally connected than anything that they've participated in their childhood. So we're trying to promote attitudes that reflect an openness and interest and positive attitude toward cultural differences. My colleague Fernando Reimers at the Harvard Graduate School of Education has written extensively on this, and I'd recommend his work to you. He talks about our need to do a better job in this society of teaching world history, geography, international law and relationships, human rights, and things of this nature. Foreign language skills. I note that most of you who come from other countries have an impressive command of English. That is the exception rather than the rule in a country like this. We need to do a much better job on that, even though English has become the quote-unquote lingua franca in many parts of the world. It's critically important in developing habits of mind that our students coming up go through the discipline and have the pathway to understanding another society that developing fluency in a language provides. And we want that to happen for them. Some of our states, the state of Wisconsin, for example, is working very hard and has made this an explicit part of their educational program. Governor Deval Patrick and I want this to be an important signature of what happens in Massachusetts, which is why we're so pleased to see a gathering like this happening at one of our public institutions of higher education. While we do that, we're trying to think of education more holistically than we have in the past. So I'll make a few concluding points on this topic. We're trying to build an education system that doesn't just have separate silos in which we have higher education operating over here, elementary and secondary education here, early childhood education operating over here, and human and social services operating over here, but to blend these together. And that's part of my job as Secretary of Education, is to build connective tissue between the different divisions of our education system so that we have a continuous and coherent process of educating children from the earliest years. We're convinced in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for example, that an investment in early childhood education, all things considered, is probably the best single educational investment you can make. And yet we need to develop the quality of that field. We know that much of a child's ultimate brain capacity is developed during the first 4 years of life. And yet we invest almost nothing during that period by comparison with what we invest in K-12 education or in higher education. So we're thinking hard about not only making that investment decision, but how do we make that decision? What do we invest in? What constitutes, for example, quality in early childhood education? And as it involves higher education, how do we invest dollars in early childhood education to build the quality of teaching, for example, that happens in the early years? Because one of the biggest problems in the early childhood sector, which has suffered from underinvestment and low wages and a fair amount of low quality, has been how do we upgrade the quality of the teachers in that sector? And this is a challenge we put to our colleagues who are assembled with us around the table in higher education. What do we need to do a better job of training early educators and creating a genuine profession in that field so that people can make a decent living and spend a career educating our youngest citizens? As we think about elementary and secondary and higher education, and I understand most of you are from higher education, we think about a variety of challenges. How are we, for example, preparing our children not only to enter college? In a state like Massachusetts, we have close to 70% of our students go on to higher education. And yet, not nearly as many finish higher education. So what contributes not only to the readiness to be admitted to college, but the readiness to go to college and successfully complete college and earn a degree? And we have sometimes mixed, sometimes conflicting, sometimes passing messages in terms of our communication between our secondary school educators and our higher educators, so that we will think in secondary education we're doing a great job of preparing students to go to college, and we'll find out when they get to college, over a third of the students graduating from our high schools in Massachusetts and going to public higher education need remedial developmental classes when they get there. That suggests to us that we've got to do a better job of jointly setting standards and expectations between higher education and secondary educators so that students have a more coherent passage from one level to another, rather than going through high school thinking I'm doing a great job, I'm meeting all the requirements, and then getting to college and finding out that I'm not prepared. Governor and I believe that virtually all of our citizens will, in the foreseeable future, need some level of post-secondary education. If you cannot attain a high school diploma in this society, there's nowhere to go to make a decent living. So we've got to set up the systems and supports necessary to make that happen. First of all, we've got to build out a robust system of higher education that has diversity within it. So we have community colleges, we have our state college system, we have our state university system. They need adequate physical plant and faculty to take care of the numbers we'll have to educate if, in fact, we make good on the promise of everybody needing some post-secondary education. Secondly, we'll need to attend to the needs of students. Students will need financial aid and support in order to do that. We will need to make a greater investment as a Commonwealth. Third, we'll need to make sure that they're prepared for the rigors of higher education so that we maintain a high standard and that we hold our higher education system responsible and accountable for maintaining a high standard. We'll need to know that people in our elementary and secondary system understand what those expectations are and can organize themselves to meet those expectations. We'll need to attend to things that we have, that I suspect some of you have, a dropout crisis. We're about to issue a paper on dropouts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We lose annually 10 or 11,000 students a year who fall out of our secondary system somewhere between grade 9 and grade 12 and go out into the underground economy, go out into the welfare system, go out into the prison system. Some of them come back, but relatively few. This is a major waste of human capital as far as we're concerned, and it becomes a drain on the society as a whole. We need to think about how higher education and elementary and secondary and early childhood work together to create a seamless pipeline that students move through. And every step of the way they receive not only the academic education that they need to be successful, but they receive the other kinds of supports that are going to be necessary if they're going to thrive in an academic education. One of the things that we've noticed after 15 years of leading the nation in elementary and secondary school reform is in those places where we have achievement gaps, they tend to be places with high concentrations of poverty. What that suggests to us is that notwithstanding certain notable exceptions, the intervention of schooling by itself is not enough to overcome the disadvantages of poverty. Schooling in our society in elementary and secondary is 6 hours a day, 180 days a year. That means it constitutes 15% of a child's waking hours during that period of life. That's not a strong enough intervention in terms of overcoming the disadvantages of poverty to put everybody on the same plane. So we've concluded that we've got to do some other things in addition to what we do to improve the quality of teaching and learning in every classroom in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We've also got to think about how we bring to bear human and social services for students who need those services in order to come to school unimpeded from learning. We need to extend school time. School time needs to be longer. School time doesn't necessarily need to be the same for everybody. We need to move to a system that's more based on mastery rather than the amount of time that you've sat in a chair or been in a set of classes. That's what it's going to take if we have some students who come to school highly disadvantaged, sitting side by side with other school students who've had tremendous advantage. We can't expect the same treatment and the same length of time in the system to serve both students equally well. So we have a lot of fundamental rethinking of our system to do in terms of how we work together to meet the challenges. The onus and challenge to higher education, I think, is huge. Higher education is the beacon. It sets the standard. It's the ultimate destination for where we want all our students to go and be successful. Higher education also has the responsibility of training our teachers and doing a lot of the research and advocacy necessary to help us create that seamless pipeline that I talked about that prepares everyone to graduate from high school ready for success in college. So the challenges on higher education right now are enormous, just as the financial challenges are significant as well. And so we're struggling with some of those same dilemmas that I know each of you in your own way, in your own society, is struggling with. I guess I would leave you with the thought that this challenge of 21st century skills and global education and developing sort of global international competency is, I think, at the heart of what we need to do if we're to equip our students to be successful in the future. It's gatherings like this that will help us think through how to do that in a more thoughtful, sensitive, appropriate way. We appreciate your being here and your contribution to the dialogue. We hope that we have something to contribute as you think about the challenges you're meeting, just as we know we have a lot to learn from you as we think about the challenges we're addressing here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the United States more broadly. So again, welcome to all of you. Thank you for making the trip and participating in this. I'd love to have questions and comments. If you have some things that you want to ask about, I'd be happy to chat with you some more. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.